Good evening. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Friday. And welcome to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I am, I knew that was going to catch, but I am Stephanie Pavlantos. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah. Stephanie, do you need a second to share everything? Or are we good? Okay, great. All right. Well, tonight.
I actually have to, because of the way Facebook is like a few, like 30 seconds or maybe less than that, but behind us, then I have to keep refreshing the page until it starts. So that's what happens every week.
Okay. Well, as long as we got everything up and running, I think we're ready to go. It's a new week this week. This is a new Bible study, new book study. We finished Galatians, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that.
That was good. I think there was a lot of good stuff in there.
I have a study Bible that I use that I write all over. I mean, I every note, every new thing. So I write all over that. And then I have other Bibles I just use just to read, and I try not to write in them too much. But I filled up Galatians. So, and now we're starting an Old Testament book, Esther. And this is a fun little book. It's the Prophecies of Esther.
Yeah. Joseph Good.
By Joseph Good. And I texted Stephanie in the week, and I started, I'm like, I think we need to do more than one chapter because it's an easy read.
It is. It is short. Each chapter's short.
Yeah.
But each chapter goes with each chapter of Esther. So it's for the most part, at least the first two kept with the first two chapters of Esther in your Bible. So there might be some. How many chapters? I forgot to look. Even it's short, right?
We were only going to do the stages set this week, which is chapter 1, and then we were going to save chapter 2, the cast of characters, for next week. Mm-hmm. The stages set that chapter 1 was super short, and so we made the executive decision to go ahead and do both.
Yeah. Now he goes chapter 11 in here. But that is because he adds a whole lot more information at the end. So that'll be like a summary. It's more historical. So so he sticks with the 10 chapters, Esther's 10 chapters. So we'd be able to basically 10 is so short.
Yeah. And it's not a ton. I mean, so chapter 1 in Esther. So if you don't have the book, I guess all that to say, read the book of Esther. And you'll understand. We're going to fill in some of the gaps. Like today, we are going to talk about how Xerxes came to reign. We're going to, we're going to fill in some of the gaps. But if you just read what's going on in the Bible, we're tracking right with you. Yep. So you should be fine.
Yeah. We're just going to add some commentary to it is all. Mm-hmm. And you can write some of this down. I actually wrote some of the verses and highlighted some of the verses that he talks about.
I have 2 pages of notes. Two pages. So I liked it. He started out. Okay, so I will say I brought up in a Southern Baptist Bible Baptist church in the South, and I've done all the ladies' Bible studies on Esther, of course. And the first thing the teacher always says is, this is the only book in the Bible that the name of God is not mentioned. And yes, that is true. I mean, the specific words, spelling, English, Aramaic there. Or is it? It is. If you look at the original language of the book, it's actually in there. The word Yud He Vav He is in there 4 times, and I am, the name I am, is in there an additional time. So, spoiler alert.
Yeah, and but I love where, of course, if you do any of the feasts, this is the festival of Purim, and the name Esther he mentions, of course, is a Babylonian name. Her name was not Esther by birth because she was, of course, Jewish. But I thought it was interesting. Her Esther is derived from the Babylonian name Ishtar, and that means as beautiful as the moon. And of course, it's vocalized ha Esther, like a HA, like the, meaning covering or the covering of God's face.
I had never heard that before. I always heard Myrtle because her biblical name, her Hebrew name is Hadassah. And so I always look up the names and everything. And I knew that, but I have never heard Ha Esther. I've never heard that covering.
So yeah, and it's kind of where we get Easter, you know, is what some people say. But we won't get into that. It's just Ishtar is where, because of the way it's vocalized, it almost sounds like Easter in the way we would say it. So so very interesting there. And he did give a little information about Purim, and that's spelled Purim, but it's pronounced like Por, Poor. So anyway, he gives a little information on that, and then he kind of goes into Deuteronomy 31:18 and some of that stuff. So and then he gets into Yod He Vav He. So it's really interesting, the stuff he brings in.
Yeah. So and if you're not familiar with Purim, it is it's not one of the main feasts. Right. It's not a designated feast, but it is something that's been celebrated by the Jews since this time, basically, because it does say at the end of Esther to remember this. And basically it's the retelling of this story, and it's a masquerade party almost.
Yeah, it's fun though.
It is. And like every time they read it and they say the name Haman, everybody hisses or boos, and you know, every time a different name is said, they would cheer. So it's have you guys
we did it this past year, and oh my goodness, Ryan had bought all the kids these horns, people, you know,
the noisemakers.
Yeah, and my husband literally got up and he's like, I can't deal with this anymore. This is too much. Because we weren't like in a big like building. We were in our sunroom. So it was loud. And and they like to blow those. But that it is, I mean, so every time you say the name Haman, so they would blow their big old horns, and so that was hilarious. But they enjoyed it way too much. So yeah, but it was fun, and it's fun just to do once. I mean, it's literally a feast. You know, you eat, you have fun.
I've heard it described as the Jewish equivalent of like Halloween almost. Yeah, you know, just because you can wear masks and you can celebrate. I mean, if you really, really get into it, and it's a party, and it is a feast, and you know, there's a lot to it. Mardi Gras, it's like Mardi Gras or Halloween, you know, kind of equivalent atmosphere. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
And it's a required feast, so it's not
right. It's not required. But it is a traditional feast, and like Hanukkah is not a required feast either, but it is a feast or a celebration.
So if you go by biblical feasts, this one and Hanukkah are not them, but it's fun it's fun, and it's a good time, like, you know, just to get into the words, and that's what we did. We actually read parts of the story and you know, just had fun with it. So
right. All right. Well, I guess we could set the stage a little bit more. I'll give you the spoiler. He does on page 4 tell us the verses. And so the Yud He Vav He, Adonai, name of God, is not written specifically. Like if you were to read it right to left in Hebrew, it's not there, but it is in multiple verses as an acrostic. So it at the beginning of each word, you can see the letters.
There are phrases that in the beginning of each word in that phrase
exactly
is the name of God. And here's an interesting thing. He said, why would God conceal his face from those he loves? The rabbis teach that the Jews assimilated into the surrounding cultures and began to forget and neglect their total dependence upon God.
I know you can't see it in the glare. I have the same thing underlined.
This caused the conditions that clouded the divine image and allowing the concealment of his countenance.
Right.
Though concealed, God never departed from his children, but continued to be with them even in their captivity. And it's interesting. So a couple weeks ago, I couldn't sleep at night. I felt like I was supposed to be reading Chronicles, so I kind of dove into Second Chronicles like at midnight, and started reading this, and it's very interesting. And I know many people probably aren't interested in reading Second Chronicles, but it chronicles David's life and then his offspring who were kings. And it ends because it just we have the northern kingdom, which are the 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom, which the story of Esther, they're Benjamites, so they're from the southern kingdom of Judah and Benjamin. And even it actually in Chronicles says that some of the Levites left the northern kingdom and came down into the southern kingdom to live because they were being booted out of the temple because they the northern kingdom set up their temple with false gods. It's an amazing story when you read it. I was actually very intrigued, taking notes and highlighting and all of that, because one king would do what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. The next king might do what is right in the eyes of the Lord. And you might have a couple kings, a good king had a good son. And then you might have a couple where an evil king had an evil son. And it's like total drama. So you have this one king, when he becomes king, he kills all of his siblings so that no one can take it from him, and he steals their inheritance. And then it's like, and then they marry like the king or Ahab, the northern king's daughter. Yeah, so you have like Jezebel there getting involved, and so it's very like soap opera type of but it's good reading to understand then that they were taken. Esther, her family, probably Esther was born there, but her family was taken into Babylon. And that was almost, my math, it was almost 100 years later or less after the northern kingdom was taken to Assyria, and they spread out and became part of the Gentiles. So it's very interesting. I encourage you to read the background sometime.
There you go. All right. Well, should we start with Esther 1?
Yeah. Do you want to first give where all the names are?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So the first one is, if you want to write these down, make a note and go to blueletterbible.org or get a Hebrew version that you can read. You're not going to see it in English, but the first one is
it gives the English part. So
Esther 1:20, where it says, "It and all the women will give." That actually, that whole phrase, every little word that begins has it's backwards in that one. If you're reading it in Hebrew, it's going to look backwards, but it would be Hey Vav Hey Yud. So you'd have to look at it the other way. And then in Esther 4.5, it is in order, reading from right to left. It says Yud Hey Vav Hey, and let the king and Haman come today. So that's a little bit later. And then again in 5:13, so that was 5:4, and then 5:13, it's backwards again, which I don't think is a coincidence. And then it's Hey Vav Hey Yud, and that one says, "This gives no satisfaction to me." That's the phrase. And then the final one is in Esther 7:7, and it's frontwards again, and it says Yud Hey Vav Hey, and it's that his fate had been determined. So those are the 4 times that Adonai, the Yud Hey Vav Hey name of God, is in there. So it is in there.
Unusual, because they have actually found in the Torah God's name spelled like, what is it, every so many letters, like his name,
like every 30 letters, I think. If you go to like the 30th letter, and then you start counting, like it's God's name spelled over.
Because the number of his name is 26, and so that has so and then like Genesis, it's in there the right way, like as you would read it in Hebrew, and Exodus, and then if you skip Leviticus, it's backwards in the Numbers and Deuteronomy. And the reason is they're both pointing to Leviticus.
Yeah,
and so it's very interesting. So this isn't like an unusual thing. It's all in the Torah where his name is spelled out in sentences. So it's very cool. And obviously it's whether God arranged it that way, whether the writer knew what he was doing. We don't know, right?
Well, we'll have to wait and ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then we kind of go in, and he's talking about how the stage is set. I loved this line, and it really made me pause, because if you consider, the rabbis teach that that Jews had assimilated into the surrounding areas. They began to forget and neglect their total dependence on God. I mean, I can't, and I'm not trying to be political, but when I read statements like that, I can't help but say, and so in America, and so have we, so have we seen this happening in our communities and in our lives. Well, then he makes a statement on page 5. It says, Esther deals with the nature of the false Messiah and his demonic hatred of Jews. And so it's almost, I want to say biblical, but, he's Joseph Good is talking about how this is going to be a prophetic book. And I've never considered Esther to be a prophetic book.
Yeah.
But when we see items like this and how, nobody's ever just come out and said Esther dealt with a spirit of anti-Semitism, and a hatred of the Jew. Nobody specifically says that. I mean, it's there. We know it's going on, but it's never just said. And I mean, anti-Semitism is a lot of why our churches have kind of flipped and turned into what they are today,
And anti-Semitism began the whole process of not wanting to keep the Sabbath as a Saturday Sabbath and not wanting to keep the feast because, we've talked about that plenty of times.
Right.
But, and it was interesting because I was talking to my sister this week, and I was explaining some of the things that I've been learning and all of that. And she could not get past, which I'm sure many people who are watching this could have the same issue. If what you're saying is right, why did God allow it to go on for 2,000 years and not correct somebody or change it? How can all these churches in the last 2,000 years
be wrong?
How could they? Right, exactly. How could they be wrong? Is what she was saying. And I said, but you have to understand, there's revelation, and God is giving more and more His people revelation. I put on Facebook about the church, and this was in 2019, but they actually changed from a Sunday.
I saw after studying the Bible, right? Yeah, they changed from a Sunday to a Saturday. I love that. I did see that. But remember, yes, it's happening, and yes, God has allowed it, but He has always protected His remnant, and He's always he's behind the stages in Esther, but He's behind the stages in Esther, right? And so it may look like all is lost for us, and He's kind of been pushed back because we're no longer calling on His name. It doesn't mean He's gone. It doesn't mean He's not here anymore.
And we have to remember that, like, even the word Jew probably started about this time in history, because Haman was anti-Semitic, and this is probably the first book where we see the word Jew.
It is.
So
up until this point,
short for Judah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, up until this point, a Jew only referred to the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
And so, and it would have been Judah. They would have just said Judah. And so now they're kind of lumping, like a Coke is always a soda. It's always Coke is always Coke, and Kleenex is always Kleenex. And so they're just kind of lumping
Xerox.
it all.
My husband still uses Xerox. It's like I don't know one uses that word anymore.
So we've done the same thing too, as we've taken something very specific and we've kind of blanketed term, put a blanket term on it. But
it's very interesting because the 10 tribes really never fully came back. And when they did try, they actually, because of Judaism had taken over, especially by the time Jesus was on the scene. They had to convert. I think we probably talked about this during Galatians, but they had to convert when they came back, if they wanted back in Israel, the country of Israel. So they were living with the Gentiles.
Right. Yeah, so and they looked very Gentile.
Fascinating history that many of us don't know, because I've tried to explain this to some people and they just looked at me like, I didn't know there was a civil war, and so we need to know. We need to know those things.
We do. So, anyway, all right. So Esther 1 starts out with a party. And he suggests
didn't end well, but
that there's a tie to the prophecy in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is like 70 years, and will be in captivity kind of thing. And he just makes a simple statement that says no one knows exactly when that 70 years began or ended. And then in another source, I have an Israeli Bible. I opened the wrong side, but it's the Israel Bible. It's been translated by Rabbi Tuli Weiss, and it's a very
big book.
It's a thick book, and it's very Israeli, and they have wonderful comments from the Midrash and Hebrew information. I mean, they're thinking and like all of the. I mean, there's just everything in there, and so they made a note that they believe that Xerxes had miscalculated, and he thought, oh, the 7 years is up and nothing has happened, and he's kind of thumbing his nose at God, and that's why he had this party. So their reference was he miscalculated, and it wasn't really happening.
And it says it's in the 3rd year of his reign, in verse 3. So if you but it's interesting, and because it says, just to read verse 3 and 4, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. So it's a man feast. There's all in there. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the province were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp and circumstance, so to speak, of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And I learned this, so let me just insert this when it talks. So if your mind can go to Isaiah 5, I think after Uzziah's death, the king, what is it, Isaiah see but the train of the robe of God entered in the temple. And it was interesting because what somebody told me was that a king like this, like he would have done, would have put the added the robe of the king he defeated to his own robe to make, so a king who had a long train defeated many enemies. And this is kind of like in the sense of what he wants to kind of show them. He's showing them all he's done for himself and how he has who is conquered and
well, I want to back up because you mentioned something before we started. So it says he reigned over 127 providences, and different versions have different things. But this Israeli version said the providences stretched from India to Ethiopia. So that's how massive it was. Yeah, and so what did you had heard? You had mentioned something about the number 127?
So it's interesting. The number 127, and I'm just going to read what because I had heard it, but then I looked it up, holds deep symbolism and significant meaning in the Bible. It appears in various contexts. In this article, he's just saying we're going to explore, but he says that the number 127 appears, it reveals insights into God's plan and purpose. The Hebrew word associated with the number 127 is Adama. So Adam, like Adam, and then on the end, meaning ground or land. It's also mentioned in significant biblical accounts, such as the age of Sarah at her death. And it says it also implies divine symmetry between the Old and New Testaments. And so it's kind of interesting. There's like fertile ground. It can refer to a specific plot of land. And so, I didn't read everything on here, but it's a good article if you just look up like the meaning of 127 in Hebrew and all that it means. And so basically in Hebrew, when like Sarah's death, when she died at 127, now connects her to Esther, because Esther will reign with her king husband over these 127 providences. So there's a connection when a number is involved. So
I have also heard that Esther is very much parallels the story of Joseph. And there's a lot in that aspect too. So I'm just curious, as you're going through it, kind of keep maybe that in the back of your mind and see if you can begin to see any parallels. And so the number one that I noticed is, Joseph doesn't have his family because he got sold off. Esther doesn't have her family, sold off. He spent time in a pit. She spent time in a harem. So like held, and then called to come before the king, called before to come the king. So there's lots and lots of little parallels like that. So definitely look for that as well.
And it says here that it's a number is associated with kingship.
Yeah.
Representing leadership, authority, and divine establishment of rulers. So,
okay, I want to hold that thought. Remember what she just said: divine establishment, kingship, fertility, all that. Because when we come back and look at the name Esther, there's some interesting facts that kind of go along with that. Yeah. Myrtle.
So this is interesting because it describes where they were in the king's palace, the court, and all that they're drinking, and it says, and drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had.
I thought that was funny. Yeah.
The king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. And so Queen Vashti was giving a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus.
Right. Well, I guess let's clarify that name, King Ahasuerus.
Yes.
Ahasuerus.
Yeah.
So there's a lineage so this is taking place in Persia, and that's important, which is the modern Iran. Yeah. And at this, there were 4 different palaces in Persia for that, whatever district you were in, this is the district that was usually used in the wintertime. It was one of 4 capitals. And so Ahasuerus, and I'm probably saying it terribly. So think about this. Okay. Israel went into captivity, okay, and they were taken by Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar took them, brought them into Babylon. And they were there. There was a prophecy later that they would be held for 70 years. And then his son, Belshazzar, took over after Nebuchadnezzar. And he's the one that had the writing on the wall, that he had the feast, and he was using all the utensils from the temple, and he was showing it off, and there was writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Want to go ahead? Say that again.
Oh no, I just said it, and he was misusing it all, right? He was
misusing, right? Yeah. So he was misusing. So tradition is in that temple or in that party, the ceiling fell in on him and he was crushed. And tradition is that Cyrus was already there. It's not that he came storming the gates, but that he was actually at the table. And so they took advantage of that situation. And some people say Cyrus and Darius were the same person, but then others have Cyrus the Mede having two sons, Smerdis and Cabresis. And our author says that he had two sons. Others do too. Smerdis died pretty quickly, and then Cabresis actually starting ruling. Smerdis, though, before he died, he had a son, Darius the First. So there's kind of the link. Some people think Darius and Cyrus were the same. Some people do acknowledge that there was more of a lineage. But Cyrus, when he took over from his dad Belshazzar, he actually vowed to that the temple would be restored in Jerusalem. He would allow people to go and the Jews to return, and they actually began building the foundation. And so the foundation did get finished, but by the time his son Cambyses took over, there was a pause. He put a 20-year pause on any other building of the temple. So we had to start, and then we didn't. And then Darius took over after his grandfather Cyrus, and he allowed the Jews to return. He said they could go back, they could rebuild the temple, they were allowed. And then he had a son, Xerxes, and that's our guy. That's our guy that is in the book of Esther. The Hebrew name is, because remember, this is all written in I don't want to say Aramaic because it's a blend of Aramaic, but it's a Persian history. The Jews, instead of giving him a Babylonian name or a Persian name or a Medo-Persian name, they have named him Ahasuerus. And so that's the king that's mentioned in the book of Esther, and it is King Xerxes. And the
timeline is kind of, when we think of the Babylonian exit or Babylonian capture of the Jews, you have Darius is the one who threw Daniel into the lions.
Right. There you go.
And then you have Xerxes, who would have been his son now, marrying Esther. And then his son would have sent Nehemiah to Israel, let him go back and start building the walls. So that's kind of the people we have in play that our books of the Bible are about. So
okay, so Xerxes, there's a little bit more. He throws this party. According to Hebrew tradition, he counted wrong, and he thought that he got 70 years has gone by. I'm still in charge. Let's have a party. So he begins to throw this party. Esther also has a party. I'm sorry, not Esther. Queen Vashti, because she is called Queen in chapter 1. She is called Queen Vashti. So she decides to give a party as well, and she does it for the women. And I know you read that there was free drinking. That wasn't a big deal. This version, it says there was no restriction. It said the king ruled, and the rule for drinking was no restriction. So it was quite
no compulsion to stop.
Right. And the party lasted how long? It was like 100 and something days. I can't remember. 180 days. Yeah. So we've got, the party went on and on and on.
But after the first week, he calls for his queen.
He does. And
there's
no, and everyone has taught that how dare the king call her in, because the language reveals that he was calling her in to wear her crown and nothing else, like to come before these men.
This is not undressed.
This is not PG. I mean, this is not none of it is. I don't think any of it. So everybody is appalled at that. Like, how dare he would do that? But our author, in presenting some of this historical background, that's not what would have bothered her. Like, the fact that he called her in to do that wouldn't have been a big deal. And if you think about, the Persians have belly dancing. Persians have, all these other things. So her dancing or her showing up and presenting herself, modesty was not the problem. The problem was she was the queen, and you were putting the queen on display, and that was a problem.
Would have caused her to look like nothing more than a concubine or
right. And she would have been more offended at that than coming in undressed. Coming in undressed was fine, but to do so the background that I was able to dig up on Vashti is, so the book says that she was of noble birth. And because she was of noble birth and because she was the queen, you didn't do this to a lady, right? You wouldn't do this to a lady. However, the Jewish tradition is that she was actually Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter. And when the castle or the palace was destroyed and her father Belshazzar was killed, in the confusion, she actually jumped into Darius's lap, because again, in the Hebrew version, they think that Darius and his father were dining with Belshazzar. Couldn't find any other historical information. This is all the Jewish tradition. But so she jumped into her lap because he was sitting on the throne and she was confused. She was very, very young and she was confused. And so then Darius took her and then later in life presented her to Xerxes to be his bride, sealing, also not only having a major coup in war, taking over the palace and the throne in war, but sealing that relationship and that covenant between, like, you're marrying Belshazzar's daughter, so now I've got this great arrangement to seal the deal. So then she gets asked to come and stand before these men undressed, and she's
nothing but the crown. She's
the princess and she's the queen and she's of noble birth, and that's the offense. Like, you are forgetting to whom you are speaking.
Yes, I'm not one of those. And it's very interesting because, again, we don't hear that side of the story. It's just like, it's almost as if we get the idea that come model, in your beautiful gowns and the crown that you were given, but no, it was a little less than that. So, so she, it says here that she incites the king's displeasure, and so she is simply referred to as Vashti. When he's angry with her, he no longer calls her queen. So everywhere she is queen or Queen Vashti, and then suddenly she just becomes Vashti. And I'm not sure, and honestly, was she done away with? Was she just excommunicated, or did she just go to be like one of the concubines?
I don't know. It doesn't tell us that in Esther. I will say there some other things that I saw about her, though, remember Belshazzar was not a good king. He mishandled the Jewish artifacts, right? So her dad, that's the influence that she had. So the idea is when Darius allowed the Jews to return to build the temple, and then his son Xerxes became king, she was actually saying, don't let them continue building. Don't shut it down. Call them back. You're going to lose control if they're out building, they're going to build and then they're going to want to leave. And so Xerxes called them back and wouldn't let them continue building the temple. And so she had a lot of influence on him. And I don't know if he just said enough is enough and sent her away, executed her, excommunicated her.
It doesn't really tell us in scripture. Just that he replaced her. So it's now in 2, it says, when the anger of the king had abated, he remembered Vashti, so she's no longer queen here, and what she had done and what she had been, or what had been decreed against her. Then so then they came up with the idea that at this point, the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. So you've gotten rid of her, so let's find you a new wife. And so let the king appoint officers. And this is right in the beginning of chapter 2. Appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital. So he already had a harem. This isn't something new. He's just adding. He's adding to it. So now he wants, now he wants these young, sweet, innocent girls to be part of his harem. So so it says, so here it's like, then it goes on. There's a eunuch that is in charge of all these women, and it says, let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. So this pleased the king, and so he did. So we have that. That's the idea. Let's find a new queen who will better suit you, and is and it also makes it sound like she had a mind of her own. We need to start way down where, with a woman who's never been with anyone else, a young woman who will be easily controlled.
Right. And look at if you look at 2:8, I think this is pretty important. Let me turn the page. I'll read it to you. It says, when the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress, Susan, under the supervision of Haggai, the eunuch, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under supervision of Haggai, the garden of the women. Depending on the version that you read, the Jewish Bible, the Jewish Family Bible, some of the other NASB, it says taken, and it's a very different word. But the King James Bible says Esther was brought. And so I always teach my kids connotation and denotation, right? Denotation is the definition of the word, dictionary definition. Connotation is how does it make you feel? And there is a difference between being brought somewhere and taken somewhere. So how does that make, how does that word change make you understand?
They would have brought her in, but she didn't have a choice.
Right. She was taken. She didn't, right.
Probably went from house to house looking for the most beautiful women.
Yeah, taken away and brought in. And so don't think that this is a great thing. And so, and then even, I know I'm jumping a little ahead, but Mordecai says to her, perhaps for such a time as this, right? This is the most famous line. And
it comes up later.
That you see this, but think about if Vashti is, and Xerxes is canceling any building plans of the temple. It's not just for such a time as this. You have been picked to be the beautiful queen, and it's your time to shine. It's not. It may not be that. It may be for such a time as this. You can save the temple. Yeah. You can save the remnant of our faith and belief system. Because they have begun building on the temple. Things are all on hold right now.
Right. And this was God's plan.
Right.
Get rid of this one, get her in there so she can do something, because, and like you mentioned, I mean, right here in chapter 2, verse 5 is where Mordecai is introduced. And it talks about that he sat at the gate and that kind of thing. But Esther's parents had been killed, whether they were
Right.
killed at the beginning, some point for whatever reason, or I should say they died. We don't know if they were killed or if they just died of natural
Right.
causes. But Mordecai took her in and took care of her. And so it says that she was the daughter of Mordecai's uncle. Is that how I read it right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And her name was, as you mentioned, Hadassah.
Mm-hmm.
And she had neither father nor mother.
Right.
And she was beautiful. And it says even in this book, he mentions that she found favor with the eunuch because of her beauty. And I think that some of it was because, she even asked him for his advice, like, what do I do here?
What do you suggest I do? Right. You know the king better than I do.
Yeah.
What do you suggest I do? Right.
Yeah, Laura Lee said, is this a form of trafficking? Yeah.
Probably the original. Yeah, probably the original trafficking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
she said it real quick. I didn't want to skip over it. And we'll get to Mordecai a little bit deeper, but it says he sat at the gate, and that's important to know. Anytime you see a phrase like that, it doesn't mean he's just hanging out. I've often seen him portrayed as just kind of sulking in the shadows, waiting to get a glimpse of her and having a chance to talk to her.
Authority.
Right. It actually means he had a job at the gates, because the city gates are where all the commerce was, all the judgment was. I mean, for the cultures, everything was right at the city gate. So for him to sit at the gate, he would have had a position under the king. He could have been a judge. He could have, that's where all that activity, right. Could have anything. So
bodyguards or the soldiers, anything would have been, watching who came in.
Right.
But here's the part that you like too, because if we keep going, it says in the book that we're using, the young Jewess was reared by Mordecai, is also very beautiful. Her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means myrtle. So I know you had wanted to talk about that.
Yeah,
so we're kind of getting short on time. We have 10 minutes, so we got to get
it'll be quick. It won't. Yeah. So the myrtle tree. Excuse me, the myrtle tree is an allusion to the resurrection. It's a representation of them. It's a very hardy tree, and it's also it illustrates a righteous people. And so, you think about, you mentioned that the king was a symbol of bounty and control, all of that. But then look at now what his counterpart is, and it's resurrection, and it's a resurrection of the righteous people. So I don't think I don't think names are a coincidence. Yeah. So I just think that's an interesting connection and correlation. Yeah.
And also, this is the background that really adds depth to the story.
Well, one more little nugget too, and again, going back to that illustration of how Esther and Joseph tied together in the Joseph story. You remember when Joseph finally revealed himself, the brothers went back to get the father, and Benjamin was accused of stealing a cup. And then Judah had to come before him and say, no, please don't. He had to save Benjamin. Well, this is the exact opposite, because Mordecai and Esther are of the tribe of Benjamin. It specifically says they're Benjaminites. And they have to appeal to save Judah. So we've got an exact correlation.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So those are some of the parallels that we have. You can see through scripture when you, especially if you have a good teacher that kind of shows you those. But which rabbis are really good at that, because they really understand.
They've got it. Yeah. Okay, the seventh year. We didn't mention the seventh year.
Well, because he didn't marry her, but I wanted to talk. I wanted to talk about that. But again, going back to this isn't PG. Well, I keep saying that, but it is PG. It's rated R, maybe. But there was a good movie out, the One Night with the King.
One Night with the King.
All done. And they have her reading to the king, while he's pacing and he's angry, and her reading calms him down. Well, that's not what she was being prepared for.
Right.
So they were going in, for a one night stand with the king to see if they were compatible, see if he liked her, and he did.
Right.
He did like her, and so he makes her his queen. But then that's where the 7 comes in. So it started. Remember, she says, "Get on." Right?
Let's
yeah. So she said, "Sorry, It didn't show up, did it? But maybe
I think we were pushing it at the same time.
Go ahead, and then so it was the 3rd year of his reign when this story began.
Vashti.
So now we're at the 7th year when he literally takes her to be his bride and gives her the crown, and she becomes queen.
Right. And don't let that pass. 7.
Yeah,
7's important, right? 3 is an important number. 7 is more important. It's a number of completion, finality, the end of the season or cycle. So I think
so I'll just read this on page 16. Notice that Esther becomes the king's bride and queen in the 7th year of his reign. And this is a perfect eschatological, I hate that word, but picture of the Messiah and his bride during the 7th millennium.
Right.
So it says Mordecai, who adopted Esther, is the key figure in this chronicle of the past and a picture of the future. He represents Messiah.
Isn't that neat?
So when you see these this underlying theme and picture that's happening, playing out, it's kind of just like, it says, and this just popped in my head and I looked down, it says, and when in Esther 2:19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, but my mind instantly went to the parable of the 10 virgins and be ready, and how that's a parable of the bride and those in the bridal party. And now we have all these women who are virgins are being considered who's going to be queen, who's going to be the bride.
Right. And was she picked because she was ready, right? Because there's a lot of other women that were overlooked before the king picked her. So that's interesting. So, I think it's good. Yeah, just a lot of little details that we never pause. We just read through it. It's good. I mean, it's interesting just reading through it, but pause, look up words, look up things,
And we can't leave out the fact that Mordecai had said, do not reveal who you are to anybody. So, and it says in Esther 2:20, Esther had not told her country nor her people as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up with him. So she did not tell anybody that she was from the tribe of Benjamin, that she came from Israel or the southern kingdom, So, So it's interesting because that's going to be keeping that a secret was pivotal in the whole story.
And dangerous.
Yeah.
And we have to think too, and this will come up in the next couple of verses. It's not like she could just go in and talk with him. She had to be summoned by him. So the timings of things, the limited time she has, choosing what she's going to say. I think we went over it pretty quickly, but Mordecai kind of finds out about the scheme against the king. And it's just
that was the last part of chapter 2. So
So, he kind of overhears, I guess, if you want to say, the scheme that's coming against Xerxes, and he mentions it.
Eunuchs.
Yeah. And mentions it, and it's just recorded, and his name is recorded and everything, but nothing is, like, oh, thanks, I'll take the report here. So, but it is put into the king's annuals or business accounts. And so we have that. So like these little things are happening behind the scenes that,
setting the stage.
First glance, you're just like, these are just things that are happening, and you never really know how God is preparing for things behind the scenes, and I've kind of said that a little bit too, no secret. My husband lost his whole career, like his really good job last year. And I mean, an amazing salary, everything, lost it all. And he chose not to go back into the business world. He just wanted to be a teacher. And I'm like, why would anybody pick that? Because I'm a teacher. Why? Like, I don't do it on purpose. Yeah. But looking at the way our world is and the economy and things coming down the pipe, he worked for banks. He was thick into it. And I think, I tell him the fact that you're out of the business world and out of the banking system, and you have a job in education, I think we'll still have schools. I think it's a government job, so we'll have a paycheck. It's a way of God working behind the scenes to it's okay. I know it's a lot to give up, but it's okay. So same here with her. I'm sure she thought she had a lot to give up, and she probably didn't want the king. She didn't want the throne. She did, he makes girl.
Yeah, he makes a really good point, because he said, and I'm not sure what page, but she was marrying a pagan man. She was a Jewish woman.
Okay, and that's another thing. According to law, she was not supposed to intermarry with him.
That's what I was going to read. He puts it there, basically that, and she could never marry a Jew after this, because she would be defiled by this pagan man. Exactly. And so here it is. It's difficult to imagine how Esther must have felt, knowing that she was forever losing any possibility of marriage and family within her own people.
Right.
However, as it will be revealed later, Esther's sacrifice was not only to spare her life and the lives of her family, but also the lives of the entire Jewish race. Exactly. Her role in saving her people and the future restoration of the temple encompassed more than either she or Mordecai could understand. So
exactly.
Yeah. I think so we're actually out of time.
We're almost out of time. But that's a perfect place to leave it, because now we'll get to the rest of the story, and there is a little more in the genealogies. So
do we need one chapter or two next week? So
I'm not sure. I haven't looked ahead to see how long.
Yeah, it's a short chapter, so we'll probably do 2 chapters again.
Perfect.
So
all right. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited. I love this stuff, and we've only just.
You'll have to comment on.
Yeah, he was. He was, Nettie. He was a little bummed, but he's okay. He's a math teacher. He's such a nerd. He's a math teacher now, so he likes it, and we get to hang out a lot. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Let me find our outro. Thank you, guys. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat.
If you missed today's show and want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all of the other live Lamb show archives on the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.